Yeah.
There we go. Well,
Awesome.
welcome to Early Work Masterclass number 2. Super stoked to have Doug Oliver join all the way from Brisbane, which is
So far away these days.
So far away these days. Hopefully, I don't think we have that many people in the early work community from Brisbane, but we are we're actively thinking about sort of diversifying beyond Sydney and Melbourne. So, Doug, we will use you as our poster boy for our Queensland pursuits.
No problem.
No, but super lucky to have Doug. He's been a really awesome person in the Australian startup ecosystem over the last few years, doing some really awesome things at 1013, where he's the head of platform. They've made some super awesome investments, which I'm sure he'll talk about, and really sort of, innovating and, challenging the traditional norm of how a VC fund is run. So hopefully we can get into a bit of that. Doug, him personally has been an angel investor, which we'll hear more about definitely in the sort of angel investing crash course. Sort of originally was working at a neobank called N26, which I guess was his sort of first dip into the startup world, where he grew the team from to 20 people in 2 months, and the company was onboarding 80 new employees every 14 days, which is super cool. He's got a lot more about him. I think I recall, Doug, you said the original dream was to be a professional swimmer. So I guess, it'd be interesting to hear about, sort of the parallels of the two and how you sort of got to where you are today. But without further ado, I'll hand over to Doug, who's prepared a cool little preso for us, and then we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. But thanks all for coming. It's being recorded, so we'll hopefully share that at some point. But hopefully it's a good session.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Jono, for that intro. Let me just share my screen here. Yeah, plenty of analogies to talk about in terms of what I've done swimming and angel investing and how it relates. So hopefully we can get into that a little bit as well. There we go. So first thing I'd like to talk about actually is this concept that I stumbled across a couple years ago called, hang on, let me just fix up my slides. Called Time Billionaires. So this was on a podcast with Tim Ferriss with a guy called Graham Duncan. And it's about this concept though, that currently, how do you explain the difference between a millionaire and a billionaire? Like that's a lot of money to comprehend for, a normal person. And if you think about it as seconds or time, 1 million seconds is only 11 days, while 1 billion seconds is 31 years. And as young people in an industry that may not have capital or may not have experience, what you do have right now is time, and a lot of time, a lot more than someone that may, have done 20 years or is your manager or is a partner at a VC firm. You have more time than them to learn as much as possible and to learn from them. So it's just an interesting concept that I like to think about a lot. And also a little tidbit that how you'll invest your time, and it's probably not going to be angel investing. And there's a couple of reasons that I'll go into that later. First of all, this isn't financial advice. Just get that tidbit of the disclaimer out of the way. So don't take anything I say to heart and invest all your money in crazy startup businesses. Have a effective decision-making process if you do decide to do that. So a bit of a crash course on how angel investing works in Australia. So ASIC defines a term called sophisticated investor status or wholesale investor status. That means that to qualify as someone that can invest in the majority of private companies in Australia, you have to either have $2.5 million in assets or have made $250,000 over the last consecutive 2 years. And because of this, the majority of Australians can't invest in private companies, which is a shame, but there's also very good reason. And we've seen it in a lot of unlisted equities that's come up as well in the past with cryptocurrencies, people losing a lot of money because of this and because of being unregulated. So it's there for a reason as a safety net to the general public. They're in saying that crowdfunding sites through CSF allow retail investors to invest in companies. There's a few of these around. But they often charge both the startup companies to list on the website a percentage of the fundraising process and investors when they decide to invest. And you often only buy ordinary shares in these companies, which means nothing really when you first invest in the companies, but later on the line, when you do look at exit events, there's a very big difference between preference shares and ordinary shares and the different share classes that can stack in between. But it goes into a lot of detail. You can read up about different exit events and what they look like. I think Uber's a really good example of what dilution can look like in a company at an exit event. And if you've read any books like Super Pumped and you look at what super shares and preference stacking looks like in an exit event, it's a very big thing. Just because you invest early doesn't mean you're going to walk out with a lot of money. So first, I'm going to go into a little bit about what I do on a daily basis as my job. And the reason I can invest in these early stage companies is because I'm helping create a system that allows people to do so. So 1013 is Australia's largest vendor syndicate platform. And where's my slide? So we were established in 2019, and so far we've done 19 rounds of funding into 13 different companies. We've raised and deployed $26 million in capital across those companies. Our average check size is $45,000 from our investors, of which we have 225, actually 229 or 30 last time I counted this morning. So it's constantly growing in that regard. And the reason we created 1013 was because we saw a discrepancy in the venture ecosystem with either you're making these early stage bets into companies that are extremely risky, or you're putting your money into a venture capital fund in which you no longer control where your money is allocated to. You basically say, this is a portion of my capital. It's usually anywhere between 1% and 10% of your net worth for a high net worth individual. And you say, okay, take my money for estimated 5 to 10 years, and maybe I'll see a return out of it at the end of the day. So we wanted to change what that model looks like and have investors that are both busy, but can be more involved in the process. So these investors are really important to us. They've worked at some really amazing companies, Plaid, Afterpay, Canva, Nitro, OpenGear, and then professional services firms like BDO, Cloud Conformity, Macquarie, Technology One. So have both been employees or founders at these companies. And yeah, obviously they make up the backbone of what we do. So it's always making sure that we have the best product we can provide to them. And then we've also co-invested with a bunch of really cool people. So in Australia, you may know Blackbird, Airtree, Grok Ventures, and Skip Capital, which are the co-founders of Atlassian's family offices. And internationally, we've invested with Jeff Bezos's family office, Bezos Expeditions, Microsoft's venture fund, Salesforce Ventures, and a VC fund called Ribbit Capital, which has done some of the biggest, well, arguably the biggest and best fintech investor in the world. So they've done Robinhood, Plaid, Nubank in Brazil, and many more. So exactly what is 1013? So 1013 isn't a fund. We're a deal by deal venture syndicate. So what that means is we find really great companies for our investors, and we do a ton of due diligence on them, usually over 300 hours of due diligence per company with our small team of 6 or so people, 3 of them exclusively dedicated to doing due diligence on these companies. And then we generate probably a 6,000 to 8,000 word memo around these investments. And then we'll go out to our general investor base with this information and give them a time frame. Usually it's 3 to 4 days to decide whether they want to make an investment or not, or until the investment fills up. So our deals generally are in the sizes of $500,000 to $5 million. Our largest check is 4.6 mil to date. And these deals fill up anywhere. I think our fastest deal filled in 13 minutes. Our longest deal took the whole 5 days. So by doing this and providing this, we're effectively insourcing the deal due diligence process ourselves, for investors that may not have the time to dedicate to the asset class. Because I'll talk about it more later, but angel investing as a whole is a really cool thing and it's awesome, but it's a really horrible way if you trade time for money to be investing your capital. So we hear a lot about what great international successes look like for deals, but we don't hear a lot about what great Australian successes look like. So obviously everyone's heard about Canva. Now they're at $20 billion valuation. But since 1990, or at least on this graph, if you talk about tech companies in Australia, there's actually been quite a lot of $100 million plus private tech companies in Australia. And recently, we've seen some really great exits out of that as well. Cloud Guru exited for $2 billion this year. Message Media exited for $1.7 billion in the last week. And a Brisbane company called Tritium is about to do a $2 billion SPAC on the NASDAQ. And in the range as well, we've seen a lot of other companies go through the list and when they've reached their $100 million valuations. And I'm sure a lot of you have either worked there or aspire to work at these companies in the future as well, which is awesome. But there is a lot of Australian tech success stories, and I think it gets forgotten in the big rounds that we see in TechCrunch. So when you talk about angel investing and what that actually involves, obviously it's talking to founders and understanding their process, but it's also a lot of other things that happen in the background. So it's not about, at least to us and to me personally, it's not about meeting a founder and going, I really like what you're doing. Here's some money for it. And to a lot of people, it is that want to invest that way. But I like to take a lot more analytical approach, and I trust our deal team to make those analytical decisions as well. So through that, we look at various different things, whether it be market sizing, what unit economics look like, capital efficiency, what your like customer and supplier analysis looks like, and then make other things like, obviously, we're probably not the only investors that are going to be investing in this business. And investors do talk, especially in the Australian venture capital scene. So it's making sure that, honesty, I guess, is the best policy in that regard in terms of what you're saying to different investors and how it comes across off the table. And then we even go sometimes for our later stage businesses, like what does an acquirer conversation look like? Like how is this company going to exit? What does the time frame look like? What does the overall market look like? Who are they competing against? And stuff like that. And overall, this is one of our deals here that we actually did last year, I believe. Yeah, last year. That took 313 hours from our deal team, from process of first meeting the company to launching the deal and like transferring the funds to that company. That probably involved several hours with the founders themselves. So something that I like to think about a lot when angel investing is a lot of people say the founders and the team are everything when you're investing in a business, but it's really only a small part of what actually gets done to get a deal across the line. So when someone says, I want to start angel investing, what I generally say to them is, okay, give me 30% of what you own. And in 5 to 10 years, there's a small chance I'll give you between 0 and 1,000x this. And that's not a very appealing thing if you put it in that perspective to someone, but it's honestly the harsh reality of angel investing. It's about returns, and it's about potentially hitting that fabled exit opportunity that you can make that LinkedIn post by and retire on a beach or buy an apartment somewhere on the bay. So overall, it's a horrible way to make money. And if we go back to this concept of time billionaires, you'll much rather spend your time searching for a company you enjoy, doing a job you enjoy, and potentially earning ESOP or creating your own company where you own the majority of that business. And it sort of wears that value and reward graft in your mind when you're talking about investing. Because as we can see in the previous slide, there's a lot of time that goes into not investing in companies, but just learning what markets do. And a lot of the time, depending on how you're deploying your capital, it may not even be in markets you're all that interested in or doing things you're all that interested in. So that's about our company. Now I'm going to go shift over to how I actually deploy my own capital in the company, because as an employee at 1013, I do invest personally and get to decide on where I deploy my own capital in these investments. It's not in every single company that we invest in. And that's sort of my way of working around the investment rules that occur in Australia, is by creating and working on the company myself to be able to invest. So this is a photo that I have, and I really love this photo. I actually spent a while searching for it. This is back when I wanted to be an Olympic swimmer. So I spent probably a decade, all my teenage years, training 10 times a week, 5 a.m. and 4 p.m. in the afternoon for like 4, 5, 6 hours a day. I only discovered startups in 2018, but why I love this picture is because it explains the concept of early stage companies really well. There's 12 people in this photo. 3 of them are about to head to the Olympics in Tokyo in 6 weeks. 5 of them are Commonwealth Games athletes, but all of them were in the top 1% of competitive swimmers globally at one point. So just because you have a really great company doesn't mean everyone is going to make a living out of it. Everyone's going to make a return out of it. Probably only one person in this photo is going to make an actual living out of competitive swimming. Bonus points if you actually know who that is. So what else did I have in here? Oh, and then another side note that I like to mention, I had a really great debate with one of our investors about this, who told me to convince his daughter that being an athlete is also not a very good use of your time. We were the second best club in Australia at this point in, I believe it was in like 2017. We won $1,000. So can you imagine any other sport in which you'd be the second best in the country and only win $1,000? Which is the reason that I'm doing what I do now, because I love it more and it's probably going to make me more money one day. So these are some of the jobs I've done since probably 2018 when I first started getting into the industry. So for me, I have a framework in which I love finding something that I'm passionate about and then learning about it. And if I don't love it anymore, then moving on and learning to give up on whatever that was, because even though I spent so much time on it, if I don't enjoy it anymore, then there's not much time spending anymore. And I did a really great short TED talk on this in 2016 called The Art of Giving Up. And I have a decent LinkedIn article as well about my choice to decide to stop swimming. But so my first job that I did, I was an intern at a renewable energy firm. I wanted to learn more about how energy systems worked in Australia. And I just happened to walk into working on the project timeline for that company's acquisition, which was acquired for $5 billion in 2018. So the company was less than 5 years old. It was the biggest renewable energy acquisition in history. There's a really great article on it. I think it's a better story than WeWork, on how the founders sort of walked away with, $1 billion, but all the investors were still smiling. So yeah, I think it's in some journal somewhere. I can probably find it and post it up onto the page afterwards, but it really shows you, renewable energy is a really great resource and it gets talked a lot in Australia and especially in the startup scene. But I think the real important part that needs to be solved is the grid, for these businesses. So we had $1.2 billion assets under management effectively in Australia with not one single project broken ground. So you can just imagine in a startup sense what it would be to have a $1.2 billion business without a product and only an MVP or a pilot. That's effectively what it was in the renewable energy space at the time. Afterwards, I wanted to work more. My goal was to work more with early stage startups. So I went and interned at an accelerator up here in Queensland, and worked for free for 6 months. And that accelerator was eventually acquired by the Australian Computer Society. And then after that, I really love traveling. And for me, it's all about setting these simple goals that I want to achieve that are outside of any like career objective. It's just about constantly wanting to learn about a different industry, or do what I enjoy. Um, so I worked as a consultant that took me to a bunch of places. And then afterwards, I really wanted to be involved in the startup space. So I said, I want to work at a company that will be valued at be a unicorn while I'm working there. So I looked up a bunch of different companies across the world and settled on this one in Berlin called N26 that at the time I had about 300 employees, and said, I want to go work there. So I found out that a bunch of people there were Australians, and this is probably a bit of great advice that I've discovered myself is Australians overseas love Australians that want to hang out with Aussies, or anyone, any nationality, really, as long as you have something that you can relate to. So I messaged a bunch of them on LinkedIn and asked to apply for a job there. 7 rounds of interviews later, some of the hardest interviews of my life, I have to say. I joined the company 9 days after they offered me a job from Brisbane. So I hopped on a plane without anywhere to live, knowing that I'd start my job on Monday. So that was an interesting process. And as Jono said, I ended up starting off as an intern in the project management office of the company. And then about 2 weeks later, I was leading fraud and compliance for the UK launch of the business. And we're onboarding 14,000 customers a day through that, just the UK operations. And ended up growing the team to 20 people in a couple of months. And my goal of being in a unicorn company came true. They raised 140 million euro in January that year when I was working there. And then my next goal after that was to angel invest. And that was probably something that I really didn't have a plan for. And it sort of came to me at this point. So I had the opportunity to grow out this thing called 1013. Funny thing is, before this business, it was called Transition Level Investments. It was the family office of Steve Baxter, who was on Shark Tank. I asked to intern there at one point, and they said no. This is in 2018, and 18 months ago, they messaged me saying, do you want a job? We're starting this new thing. So it just shows you that, like, even though you may have not made something at the start, and I'll go into this very shortly, doesn't mean that that connection and the time that you spent on that wasn't worth anything. So I talk about the stuff that I've done, so I can also talk about the stuff that I didn't do. So these all the jobs that I could just remember. I didn't even go through my inbox of that I've applied for over the years in the last like 3 years. And obviously a lot of the people here have these jobs. So amazing job to you guys. You're way better than me at getting through the process. And you obviously work some really cool careers. But for me, it didn't work out, but now I'm here. And this is exactly the same case of what it's like angel investing and investing in startups. Is you may not get every single opportunity that comes across to you, and you may not get returns from those opportunities. But at the end of the day, you invest the time and you're going to get some amazing learnings out of every single thing that you actually apply yourself to. So yeah, and there's some interesting stories behind each of those. I think I talk about it a bit more later in sort of my frameworks for applying yourself for these positions, but these weren't just applications either. I individually found people at these companies and messaged them to try to get jobs. It was a whole process. I tried to file them away 1 year and it got to like 1,000 emails and I just gave up just for internships. So through 1013 so far, I've made 5 investments. These are the companies that I've invested in: Chipper Cash, Mr. Yum, Verbal, Go One, and Carded. And I like to make the point that, to me, a really important part about angel investing, and it's also something we've adopted in our model, is the fact that you get to choose your investments. Because it's super important to me to invest in a diverse range of companies, which is why I've done it. But if you're investing in a fund, or if you don't make those investment decisions, you can't, you're not able to do this, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what kind of programs or branding or education pieces anyone portrays. It's actually committing your capital to these people that matters. So every single investment I've made has, either a female founder, CEO, or a person of color. And that matters a lot to me, more than the return profile that I would have got from these companies. And obviously, I want to invest in the best companies, but I make that, trade-off at the end of the day, no matter what it looks like in the future. And I'd say for us, it is about absolute returns at 1013. Obviously, if anyone knows my boss, he's not the biggest fan of, he's a big fan of meritocracy. But at the same time, 9 out of the 13 of our investments that we've made at 1013 have a female founder or a founder of color. That's a large percentage. I'm not sure what the exact percentage is. I'm not really the numbers person, but well over 60%, 70 odd, of our investments qualify as this. So to me, it also says, and this is a sort of a statement I have against the general venture capital industry, investment industry, is if we can do this without putting an emphasis on this at all, why is everyone else that is doing so poorly? And you can look at the numbers. The numbers speak for themselves in terms of what investment looks like for underrepresented founders or diverse founders at the end of the day. So what I like to invest in, I think investment theses are really great. I don't like to call them theses. I like to call it what I just like putting money into at the end of the day. So I like pixels. So what I mean by this is I like when companies can own static pixels on a page that people view every single day. Examples of this is we're in transition level. We're invested in a company called Linktree. In 1013, we're invested in Mr. Yum. And they're able to own space, whether it be space on a table, space at a restaurant when you're looking at a menu, or link in bio. So that space was not owned by anyone really in the industry as static space until Linktree came along and said, hey, we're putting a URL here, and it's going to be our URL, and it's going to be labeled and branded, and it's going to be on every page that you go on to. That's super important. And the other concept that I really like investing in is time. Products that I see are demographic, young people using to fill a core emotion or losing time to. A lot of people talk about saving time in an industry, but to me, if you'd rather lose time and are willing giving up time to spend on a product, that's way more important than saving someone's time, because they're willingly giving up, their life to use your product. I don't have a perfect ratio for it. I'd say it's like roughly like 3-1. Like if someone is willing to give 1 minute of your time, it's worth more as a business than someone saving 3 minutes of their time. And we're seeing this hugely in the last couple of years with audio as well, the success of Clubhouse. I invested in a company called Verbal. We don't spend a lot of time listening. It's one of our senses that we probably use the least on a daily basis. Especially more now that we're working from home, right? There's not constant chatter apart from when we're in meetings. So where do you fill that time with? There's a lot of, money being lost by not filling our ears with, content or products. So as an angel investor, you're always hunting for great returns, but 90% of your startups will fail. Which is just a simple fact. I'm invested in these 5 businesses, and obviously I've done pretty well so far in this regard. 2 of them are classified as the media as unicorns now. I'm not at liberty to disclose whether they actually reach that valuation, but Yeah, so Go1 and Chipper Cash in the last 2 months have become unicorn companies. And Carded has raised the biggest seed round in Australia, getting funding from Blackbird last round. And Mr. Yum obviously has raised from Airtree for their last round that was co-led by us. So I don't think 2 out of 5 startups is bad in terms of unicorn valuation so far. So this is a concept I like to talk about a lot. It's not an overnight success. So you see all these really great articles on TechCrunch and all these people hiring all the time. And there's a lot of work that's gone into every single one of those posts and hours and dedication that comes from a founder. And it's being able to understand that. Too many things get labeled as overnight successes in this industry. And it's the reason a lot of these investments and a lot of these companies fail, is because they don't understand the effort that goes into creating and executing on these visions that these founders have had. So a couple of things I also like to talk about is founders don't need your capital. There's so much capital in the industry right now. Often we find ourselves more than not pitching to founders, actually saying what we can provide as investors, way more outside than capital, because anyone can give a great founder capital. So you have to earn the right to invest there. I think culture and team is so essential when things are remote. Currently, so many things can be misconstrued. I've been in the ecosystem enough now to see a lot of founder breakups as well, which can be the end to businesses at the end of the day. So it's making sure there's that sort of connection that's often outside of work as well for these founding teams. And the other big thing when I look at a lot of early stage investments is, can they sell, hire, and build? Because execution is everything. A lot of the time, you'll have 2 technical co-founders that are awesome at building a product and blow you away with like the sort of things that they can do. But at the end of the day, they can't sell a product, or they'll be lacking, or you have a technical founder and a business savvy founder, but then they're really bad at building teams and scaling teams. So it's all those 3 things, that trifecta, that's super important. And if they can't do themselves, knowing how to either find those people, hire those people, and manage those people. There's like a really great saying, I guess, in the industry, that you never want to be you always want to be the dumbest person in the room. And it plays a fact. You see it in a ton of these really great companies. I think there should be a lot more emphasis on what the early work community does, and other communities on operators, these early employees or employees in these companies that help it succeed. So why does this all matter at the end of the day? To me, it's all about PBs. And this goes back to my swimming career. It's about personal bests. At the end of the day, thousands of people apply for jobs. They want to create companies. They graduate universities. They submit resumes, pitch decks, graduate programs. And you don't want to be just another statistic. So you have to be thinking about what's your personal best at the end of the day. I spent a lot of time thinking about, oh man, like, why didn't I get one of these roles that I applied for? Or why didn't we get this investment in this company? Like, why'd they pass on us? But you're always competing against yourself more than you're competing against anyone else. And you have to remember that. When I was swimming, we always trained with a team. When you're at work, you work in with your co-workers, but you're always competing against yourself. And that can be to an advantage and to a detriment as well. You're always your greatest enemy. So it's making sure that you know how to balance that and balance work and life and everything. So what can you do instead? Take advantage of the access that you get given every single day for free. And to me, that's using Twitter and LinkedIn effectively. At the start of COVID, I helped create this group called Gen Z Mafia. And the power of that network was super cool. Interesting story is there was 200 employees on this, 200 people on this small startup called Clubhouse. And we probably had 10 of them. So we'd go on and there'd be Andrew Chen there. There'd be the founder of Test Pilot. There'd be, a bunch of investors at Founders Fund, and it'll be like, okay, this time we're going to hop on and everyone's going to just shill our friend's startup. And that's all we're going to do. And it was that power of that network. And yeah, I think he ended up raising $4.8 million within a week, of us just having the power of a network and knowing how to manipulate the access that we had to these people at the time. So yeah, I think that's, yeah, mostly I had an interesting story, and I think Dan probably can attest to this, that I'll briefly tell. So I went to a conference called ASIS, which is a conference done in Stanford a couple of years ago. And this concept of that, having this last line here on treading on the line of ignorance and stupidity. Um, I had heard about startups probably for about 2 months, and we had Sam Yam of Patreon come give us a talk. And I was so impassioned. I said, Sam, I have to go intern for you at this company called Patreon. It's going to be amazing. I'm going to be a great person. So I messaged him. This was at 1 a.m. in the morning. The time's converted to Brisbane time. And I said, Sam, I've been working as an unpaid intern for 6 months, but I'd really love to come work to you at Patreon. No response. But then 2 days later, he responds to me and says, hi, Doug, just getting around to reading this. Feel free to read the headline. Important, leaving 10 p.m. next time. And I said, okay, I'm going to take this advice because it's really great learnings. And I said, okay, important, leaving 10 p.m. tonight. Hi, Sam. I'd really love to go pitch to you for this internship at Patreon. I really love the stuff that you're doing. I can come around at any time. And he said, great, confirmed. I used the fact that I was only 10 minutes away from his office in an Uber, spelt in caps lock for some reason back then, to convince him to let me go to his office. And there I was, just the sheer determination and access that I had at the time to this guy from Patreon that raised $140 million, and this ignorant kid from Brisbane being like, I can go work for your company and tell you what to do and see what your best advice is to grow this business. And this is my pitch. It literally started with this slide. And I was like, I am so cool. I'm going to land this job at Patreon in San Francisco, and it's going to be great. And he never messaged me back again. So it just shows you that, not every single opportunity is going to be your opportunity, and not every single investment you make, if you're going to be an angel investor, is going to be your 1000x return. But at the end of the day, take the lessons from it, and it's going to be a great ride regardless, So yeah, awesome. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Doug. Yeah, that was super cool. So many interesting insights. I really love the slide on all the jobs you didn't get. I thought that was like a super interesting take on it all. And obviously LinkedIn and TechCrunch and the AFR always show your best selves. So it's very refreshing to have like a conversation which is super vulnerable and authentic. So I think I definitely appreciate it. I'm sure the rest of everyone else on this call. If anyone's got any questions, definitely sort of take yourself off mute and yeah, just shout out. I've got a few, but I'll hold back to give everyone else a chance.
I'll have a question. Doug, thank you so much for the presentation. I guess from your perspective, working in VC in Australia, where do you see sort of that landscape going? Do you think it's going to change much in the next 5 years?
I guess for me, I think we're already seeing a change. I think a lot more companies are realizing that previously a lot of companies thought that, okay, I'm a small company in Australia, I need to raise from Australian VCs, especially before they go take on a round and go take on like the US or another market. More often now, and it's a tribute to the fact that international VCs are more willing to put money into international companies that are not based in the US. And there being larger and larger investments at the early stage, that Australian VCs are going to find themselves, and already are, competing with international VCs, and realizing that their thesis and their mandate and their pedigree isn't standing up necessarily as well as they thought it would when they were only playing with like local ball, right? They're only like competing at the local pitch, and now suddenly they're at the international scale. It's like going from state championships to the Olympics. It's not going to be as easy as you think it would be. Hope that answers your question.
I've got a quick question, Doug.
Yep.
So obviously, I think as you sort of alluded to, the space is becoming super crowded from like a capital perspective, and you mentioned that you spend a lot of time pitching to companies about why they should take your capital. As sort of young people, how do you create sort of deal flow or sort of opportunities for yourself where so you don't typically have the same access to network and people that you'd get in sort of the biggest VC funds or like the best angels.
Yeah. I think for us, it's about being super proactive and having always your like finger on like the beat of what's happening in the ecosystem. We have various methods, obviously, that we check and different networks that we can tap into, a lot more so from founders in the past. I think there are a lot of founders in the ecosystem that are taking things like secondaries a lot earlier on, and in doing so are investing earlier than you'd traditionally have like an exit for a business and then you become an investor. There's a lot of operator investors that are sort of in the ecosystem now, and getting referrals from them is super important. But also it's just really hard, and you're going to miss out. You miss out more often than not, right? Even just in investment, not just in getting an allocation in these companies, not just actually investing in them and seeing what the result is. And that's just the nature of the game that we're sort of seeing these days. And I think it's not only us as well. I think the big players in the ecosystem, whether they be established angel investors or funds, are also feeling it. And are sort of waking up into having to shift their models or having to hire more or having to sort of adjust their thesis to something new to be able to cope. I think our big advantage is the fact that we're not in ES-VCLP, which means traditionally a fund in Australia has to invest 80% of their sort of capital into Australian companies, Australian domiciled companies. We decided not to go down that route. So probably 70% of our investments that we make aren't in Australian domiciled companies. They're in US Delaware C Corps, or they're in African fintechs, or companies in Europe. We've just done our first investment into Asia. So it's about potentially not investing in Australian companies, which is at the end of the day okay, because the best founders will always get funded.
Yeah, cool.
Hey Doug, sorry.
You can go, Sharon.
Oh, hey Doug, sorry. So I'm quite interested in your investment in Chipper Cash, and I sort of want to kind of understand what like led you to make that investment, and like what do you see more broadly in terms of like the whole fintech space over in Africa?
Sure. So I didn't come into the first round of Chipper Cash. I came into their Series A. So we already made 2 investments as a company in Chipper before I got the opportunity to invest. But one of our partners is actually from Zimbabwe. So he's seen the sort of difficulty, and this goes about to being able to relate with a product of transferring funds cross-border, which that's all Chipper Cash was at the time. It was basically Airwallex, if anyone wants to relate it to an Australian company. And so this was at a pitch day actually in San Francisco, and our partner went and said, I think this is a huge like business model. My dad owned a business in Africa, and he knew how hard it was to transfer money. And a lot of people, I guess, in that crowd, it definitely wasn't the most popular deal that day. Didn't think so. So that was a case, I guess it was like, this was only 3 years ago, a very different time in investment. Maybe if it was now, and we had the rise of, Airwallex, if we had the rise of a lot of these fintechs that have popped up in recent times, it wouldn't have been that easy to invest, and it still wasn't. There's an interesting story. We actually didn't get the pitch deck for that company. We had to convince another investor in the crowd to send it to us. We ended up getting the phone number of the founder and ringing him up and say, we got this booking at this really nice restaurant in San Francisco. Do you want us to let us buy you a steak? So he paid a $300 meal to get a $50K check in that company. And we have this constant metric in our workplace called return on stake. and it's the return on our $300 stake into this Chipper Cash deal that's now valued at close to $1 billion.
Yeah, wow. So yeah, I suppose like more broadly in terms of the fintech landscape in Australia, what are some like trends that you do foresee?
I think there was a really interesting article that came out today actually saying fintech in Australia isn't up to scratch. And I thought, this is the most ridiculous statement that I've ever heard, because I think fintech in Australia is like the highest quality system and infrastructure that I've seen in the majority of the world. Mainly because it isn't as old as every single other infrastructure system in the world, right? You look at US institutions, European institutions that are working on hundreds of years of infrastructure, and we've been around maybe like a third of that. And it shows you that a really great thing is I really love Upbank and what they've built, obviously in partnership with Bendigo. And I can tell you right now that every single feature that Upbank released would be on every single Slack design, marketing, product channel in our business in Europe, like as soon as it was released. We'd be tracking like so many really amazing things that come out of the Australian ecosystem and fintech ecosystem in these businesses in Europe and the US, because they would be so revolutionary in terms of what had been implemented there. The problem is, I don't know how well any of these implementations convert to wanting to expand internationally. I think it works in Australia because of the way the infrastructure is set up, and because we have things like OSCO, we have things like BPay, we have some level of open banking. I don't know how well that stacks up to converting to a US system where every single state has different regulation and different infrastructure, or Europe where open banking is implemented and every single country has a different level of KYC or AML. I think Australia is really privileged to be able to build on the rails that it has, which is why it does so well in fintech. I think there's some really exciting companies and things that are being done. Obviously, I really like the Airwallex story. That's probably one of the first companies I tried to join when I got back from Berlin. I don't know how well neobanks are going to do in Australia. I think there'll be one winner to rule them all, or they'll be acquired. It's happened. I think there's really great infrastructure for alternate products in Australia, whether it be loans or insurance. I think that's where fintech's going to do really well in the next couple of years.
Okay, great.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'll jump in. Thanks for going for everything. It was really, really insightful and awesome. One thing that I thought was interesting was when you mentioned the point about allocation of time. So people are going to be spending their time doing something, a certain activity or behavior, or using a certain product. It signals value. How do you differentiate? I guess what I'd probably say is like negative behavior, societally speaking, versus things that are good. So obviously, some things are probably going to be drawing on basic, psychology, and like if you look at a lot of social media, it is really just pulling people into a loop. Arguably, sometimes there's like massive benefit, like LinkedIn, obviously, but there are times where it's sort of just it can be unconstructive for individuals. Obviously, everyone can choose fundamentally, but then again, there are things that sort of underlie human emotions and human behavior.
Yeah.
So, what's your stance on that?
No publicity is bad publicity, and I think it's the same with negative interactivity. Is there's productivity and there's interactivity, and I don't think things need to be productive. I think that's a common misconception that like is sort of being built upon like by SaaS infrastructure, of having to pay a certain amount for a certain quality of product. I think being able to waste time on something is a privilege that we get and we use on a daily basis. And by doing that, it in turn provides value that can't be accessed by a lot of other markets. I think if you work with a certain product, if you're able to pay for it, it's something that you're required to do. And being required to do something, I don't think is a strong enough it sounds weird, isn't a strong enough moat because you're always shifting across to different infrastructure. Like you're probably not going to spend, and you look at the current trend, you're probably not going to spend your life at a company. You're going to move to another company, and unless you're in a leadership role, you're going to abide by whatever that company's already using. So you as an individual user aren't going to make a difference to that company if it's a consumer product, only at an enterprise level. And I don't do enterprise investments. I do consumer investments mainly. This is why I have this sort of theory. I'd rather be investing in companies that you're willing to give your time to outside of, you know, the enterprise subscriptions or SaaS products that you already have, which is why I've made a lot of these investments, right? Obviously, it goes outside of this. Go1's a corporate training app. That one I've done because I really like the founders and I've known them for a couple of years. But in terms of Mr. Yum, in terms of Verbal and Carded, it's all about being able to waste time on things and having that privilege as, you know, a person that lives in like a first world country that, you know, is able to do that.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, and just to clarify, I mean, I wasn't really getting at the whole, we always have to be productive. I think there's a lot of beauty in, you know, just enjoying life sometimes and making most of things. Yeah, so cheers, appreciate that.
Awesome.
Cool. Any final questions?
Maybe just a quick one from me. Doug, super cool presentation. Covered a lot of different flavors. It was a lot of fun. I think something I'd love to better understand from you, I suppose, in terms of, I suppose both, you know, 1013 and yourself, is when it comes to, you know, making, you know, investments in businesses. Obviously, there's the quantitative side. I suppose on the more qualitative side, you mentioned that, you know, diversity of founders was a big factor for you. That was kind of like non-financial, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
I'd love to better understand, I suppose, how you, I suppose, consider, you know, whether there are some industry spaces or some problem spaces or types of products that you wouldn't invest in for non-financial reasons. So obviously, I mean, there's stuff like oil and gas, weapons, etc. I suppose, how do you approach that, I suppose, dilemma personally? And then how does 1013 approach that as a platform?
1013 is a platform, so we don't do any investments in gambling, like illicit substances. So no gambling, no drugs, no weapons. I think, yeah, it's interesting again, and talking about like what people invest in versus what they portray in their like branding and marketing. I know investment that's happened in the last year that was publicized very differently to what that company actually does. And I thought that was super interesting because we looked at that company, and to us, it was like, oh, we don't think this industry is going to be as relevant in like 20 years. But the company that they invested in, and the people that invested in it, have a very strong stance against what that company does on social medias. As much as I get into that, but to me, I don't think there's anything that I would really. I think if it's something that would have long-term harm against someone that's using it, I'd probably shy away from investing in that thing. Or long-term harm against humanity as a whole, then I'd probably but I think that's like a very flexible sort of like line for me. I don't think it's something that like I could judge by on like a thesis. It'd be something like, okay, that company is like not something for me. It wouldn't be like I wouldn't invest in this company because there's like this qualification for it. Yeah, I think that's like the benefits of being able to make your investment decisions, right? You're not at the whim of another person like trying to tell you what that line is.
Definitely, yeah. No, super cool to just get your lens there.
Yeah.
Cool.
Awesome.
That pretty much brings us to the end. Thanks again, Doug. Clearly, sentiment's been echoed by a few people, but it was like a really awesome and engaging presentation. Yeah, thanks so much for your time. And Doug's just a Slack message away on the community. So feel free to ping him if, I mean, I don't speak on behalf of you, but I'm sure he'd be willing to
always
make time for anyone interested in sort of learning anything else specifically about angel investing or, obviously any sort of ways to hack yourself to some awesome jobs in the ecosystem.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess we'll leave it at that.
Yes.
Thanks very much to everyone for joining us. I hope you got something out of it. And yeah, I guess until next time.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers.
Thanks, Doug.
Thanks, Doug. Thanks, guys.